Shadows of the Western Sun by Miles Calder. The golden light of dusk painted long shadows across the small Montana town of Oak Ridge. The year was 1875, and like many settlements that had sprung up during the westward expansion, Oak Ridge balanced precariously between civilization and wilderness. The main street bustled with activity as merchants closed their shops and saloon doors swung open to welcome the evening crowd. Among those walking purposefully down the wooden boardwalk was Catherine Morgan, her dark blue skirt swishing against her ankles as she made her way to the telegraph office. At 24, Catherine had the self-assured bearing of a woman who had faced adversity and emerged stronger for it. She entered the small office, the bell above the door announcing her presence. "Miss Morgan," the telegraph operator nodded respectfully. "You're just in time. There's a message came for you not 15 minutes ago." Catherine accepted the folded paper with hands that betrayed none of the anxiety she felt. 3 years ago, she had left behind her comfortable life in Philadelphia to join her brother in Montana after his wife had died during childbirth. The telegram she now held might contain news that would once again alter the course of her life. "Thank you, Mr. Hobson," she said, tucking the message into her reticule without reading it. Some news was better received in private. As she stepped back onto the boardwalk, her gaze was drawn to a stranger tying his horse to the hitching post outside the hotel across the street. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work and harder living. Despite the distance between them, Catherine caught the intensity of his glance as he looked up, and their eyes met briefly. She turned away quickly, a flush rising to her cheeks at being caught staring. Catherine knew better than most how deceptive first impressions could be, especially in a place where men often carried their stories like scars, visible to those who knew where to look, but rarely spoken of aloud. Daniel Wolfe removed his hat as he entered the hotel, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. 5 days of hard riding had left him trail-worn and weary, but his purpose in Oak Ridge couldn't wait for the comforts of a bath and a proper meal. "Room for the night," he told the clerk, placing coins on the counter. "And information, if you're willing to provide it." The clerk eyed him curiously, taking note of Daniel's quality clothing beneath the layer of trail dust. "Information comes cheaper than a room, mister. What are you looking for?" "The Morgan family. I understand they have a ranch outside of town." "The Twin Pines? Sure enough. Thomas Morgan's place? About 5 miles northwest. Good man, Morgan. Came out here with his sister after losing his wife a few years back. They're raising his young daughter together." The clerk's expression grew shrewd. "Business or personal?" Daniel's face remained impassive. "Both, you might say." After securing his room, Daniel made his way to the hotel's small dining room. As he waited for his meal, he removed a worn letter from his pocket, unfolding it carefully. The elegant handwriting had faded somewhat, but the words remained clear. "Should anything happen to me, there is one man I would trust with the truth. Find Daniel Wolfe. Last I heard, he was ranging with the cavalry near the Dakota Territory." Thomas Morgan's letter had taken nearly 6 months to reach him, passed from post to post until it found Daniel at Fort Laramie. By then, the threat mentioned in the letter might already have come to pass. Daniel could only hope he wasn't too late. His meal arrived, but before he could take a bite, the dining room door opened, and the woman he had seen earlier entered. She was even more striking up close, tall for a woman, with chestnut hair pulled back from a face that combined delicate features with a determined chin. Intelligent green eyes surveyed the room before landing on him. Recognition flickered in those eyes, followed by something else. Curiosity, perhaps. Or wariness. In his experience, the two often went hand in hand, especially in women with good sense. To his surprise, she approached his table. "Forgive my intrusion," she said, her voice carrying the refined tones of the East beneath a slight Western inflection. "I believe you're a stranger to Oak Ridge, and I make it my business to know who passes through our town." Daniel rose to his feet, good manners instilled by his mother decades ago still intact, despite years of frontier living. "Daniel Wolfe, miss," he said, inclining his head slightly. "Just arrived from Wyoming Territory." "Catherine Morgan." She regarded him steadily. "What brings you to our small corner of Montana, Mr. Wolfe?" The directness of her question confirmed his suspicions about her identity. This would be Thomas Morgan's sister, the one mentioned in the letter as Kate, whose judgment I trust more than my own. "I'm an old acquaintance of your brother's," Daniel replied, choosing his words carefully. "We served together briefly during the war. Something flashed in her eyes, surprise then suspicion. How interesting. My brother rarely speaks of his war years. Some memories are best left undisturbed, Daniel said, but circumstances change. I received a letter from him some months ago. Catherine's composed expression faltered slightly. A letter? My brother sent for you? In a manner of speaking. Is he at your ranch now? I'd like to speak with him as soon as possible. She hesitated, and Daniel sensed a struggle taking place behind those expressive eyes. My brother is away on business, she finally said. He's been gone nearly 3 weeks. In fact, I've just received a telegram regarding his whereabouts. Daniel felt a prickle of unease. And what does it say? Catherine's hand went to her reticule. I haven't read it yet. Mr. Wolfe, I don't mean to be rude, but I know every man my brother considers a friend, and he has never mentioned you. Daniel nodded, understanding her caution. Then perhaps we should read that telegram together, Miss Morgan. I have reason to believe your brother may be in trouble. Catherine had lived in the West long enough to recognize danger when it stood before her, and something about Daniel Wolfe spoke of controlled danger, not directed at her, but present nonetheless. His revelation about Thomas possibly being in trouble aligned too closely with her own fears to dismiss. Very well, she said, making a decision. She withdrew the telegram, breaking the seal with steady fingers. As she read the brief message, the color drained from her face. Kate, my business is delayed. Do not trust anyone claiming to know me. My papers are in the usual place. Be careful of danger. She looked up at Daniel, her expression guarded. It seems my brother foresaw your arrival, Mr. Wolfe, though not in a favorable light. She handed him the telegram, watching closely as he read it. His expression darkened, but he didn't seem surprised. Your brother is a cautious man, Daniel said, returning the paper, as he should be. But I assure you, if he sent this, it's because he doesn't know I received his letter. And I'm to take your word on that. No, Daniel said simply. But I'd wager there's a way to verify my identity. Those papers in the usual place might hold the answer. Catherine studied him. Everything about this situation demanded caution. Yet instinct told her this man wasn't lying, at least not about knowing Thomas. I'm returning to the ranch tomorrow morning, she said finally. If you truly are my brother's friend, you'll understand why I can't invite you to accompany me tonight. Daniel nodded. I understand completely. But time may be of the essence. Would you permit me to ride out with you in the morning? Catherine considered her options. Returning alone to the isolated ranch suddenly seemed unwise, especially with Thomas's warning of danger. Yet bringing a stranger, possibly the very danger Thomas warned about, seemed equally foolish. Mr. Wolfe, I'll make you a proposition. Meet me at the livery stable at first light. Come alone and be prepared to prove your connection to my brother. Fair enough, he agreed. Until morning, then. As Catherine left the hotel, her mind raced. The usual place where Thomas kept important papers was a hidden compartment in his desk. Whatever was concealed there might reveal whether Daniel Wolfe was friend or foe, and perhaps explain why her brother, who had always led a quiet, respectable life since coming west, now spoke of danger. Dawn had barely broken when Daniel arrived at the livery stable to find Catherine already waiting, dressed in a practical riding habit, and looking as though she'd had as little sleep as he had. 2 horses were saddled and ready. You're punctual, she observed, a quality my brother would appreciate. How is your niece? Daniel asked, checking his saddle girth. Catherine looked up sharply. How do you know about Clara? Your brother's letter mentioned her. He wrote that she's the image of her mother. Something in Catherine's expression softened slightly. She is indeed. Clara is staying with our neighbors while I'm in town. I didn't want to alarm her with talk of, she trailed off. Trouble, Daniel finished for her. Wise decision. They rode in silence through the awakening town and out onto the open trail. The landscape opened before them, rolling hills giving way to pine-covered mountains in the distance. After nearly an hour of riding, Catherine finally spoke. How did you meet my brother? Daniel considered his answer carefully. It wasn't during the war, as I implied last night. That was for the benefit of any listening ears in the hotel. We met 7 years ago in Missouri. I was working as a hired gun for the railroad. Your brother was a bank auditor investigating some financial discrepancies. Catherine's eyebrows rose. A hired gun. So you're a gunslinger. Former military. I developed certain skills during the war that proved marketable afterward. Daniel met her gaze steadily. "I don't hide what I was, Miss Morgan, but that life is behind me now. And yet here you are, riding into potential danger on my brother's behalf. Some debts can't be repaid with money." Catherine nodded slowly. "Thomas saved your life?" "He did more than that. He saved my conscience." Daniel fell silent, his eyes scanning the horizon, a habit formed from years of watching for trouble. "The railroad I worked for was forcing farmers off their land using any means necessary. Your brother uncovered evidence that the company had falsified land deeds. When he confronted them, they sent me to silence him." Catherine tensed. "But you didn't." "No. Thomas Morgan is a persuasive man. He showed me proof of what the company was doing, families driven from homes they'd worked for generations, all for profit. Instead of silencing him, I helped him expose the scheme." Daniel's expression grew distant. "The railroad put a price on both our heads. We parted ways after the dust settled. Thomas headed west to start a new life, and I drifted north. They crested a hill, and below them sprawled a modest but well-maintained ranch. A 2-story wooden house stood surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed. 2 tall pines stood sentinel near the house, giving the ranch its name. "Twin Pines," Daniel said quietly. "Home," Catherine replied with evident pride. "My brother built this place from nothing. Whatever trouble he's in now, I won't let anyone take it from him." As they approached the ranch house, Daniel noticed subtle signs that raised his concern: curtains drawn despite the morning hour, no smoke from the chimney, the absence of the usual sounds of a working ranch. "Something's wrong," he said, drawing his horse to a stop. "Where are your ranch hands?" Catherine frowned. "We should have at least 2 men working at this hour. Thomas employs 4 hands full-time." Daniel dismounted, tying his horse to a hitching post. "Stay behind me," he instructed, drawing a revolver from his saddle holster. Catherine ignored him, sliding from her own mount and extracting a small pistol from her reticule. "This is my home, Mr. Wolfe. I'll not cower outside while you investigate." A reluctant smile touched his lips. "Your brother mentioned your stubborn streak." He nodded toward the house. "Stay alert." They approached the front door cautiously. Finding it unlocked, they entered to discover the house empty but undisturbed. No signs of struggle or forced entry, yet the silence remained unsettling. "The papers," Catherine said, moving purposefully toward her brother's study. "This way." Thomas Morgan's desk stood against the far wall of a book-lined room that smelled of leather and pipe tobacco. Catherine knelt beside it, her fingers finding a hidden latch beneath the right-hand drawer. The false front swung open, revealing a small compartment containing a leather portfolio. She withdrew it with reverent care, placing it on the desk's surface. Inside were several documents, land deeds, letters, and a sealed envelope with Daniel's name written in Thomas's distinctive hand. "It appears you were expected after all," Catherine said, handing him the envelope. Daniel broke the seal and read quickly, his expression growing grim. He passed the letter to Catherine without comment. "Daniel, if you're reading this, then my suspicions were correct, and the past has finally caught up with me. Chamberlain Development has been buying up ranches throughout the territory. Their methods are familiar: first offers of purchase, then accidents, misfortune, and eventually outright violence. 3 neighboring ranches have sold in the past year under suspicious circumstances. I recognize the pattern because we've seen it before. The same men who ran the Missouri land scheme are behind this one, operating under a new name. They don't know I'm the same Thomas Morgan who exposed them years ago, but once they discover it, my family will be in danger. I've gathered evidence of their methods: falsified water rights documents, threats against landowners, evidence linking them to 2 suspicious deaths. These papers are dangerous to possess but crucial to stopping them. If you've received my letter and come to Oak Ridge, I trust you with this information and with the safety of my sister and daughter. Your friend, Thomas." "Mr. Wolfe," Catherine said, her voice tight with controlled emotion, "I believe you now owe me the complete truth." Before Daniel could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through the window, they saw 4 riders entering the ranch yard, led by a well-dressed man whose bearing suggested authority and arrogance in equal measure. "Chamberlain," Daniel muttered. "Right on time." Catherine moved away from the window, her mind racing. The ranch hands. "Probably paid to disappear for the day," Daniel said grimly. "Chamberlain wouldn't risk witnesses." "What do they want?" your land officially. But really they want the evidence your brother collected. Daniel gestured to the portfolio, and to ensure no one connects them to their previous operation. Catherine gathered the documents quickly, securing them inside her riding jacket. There's a back entrance through the kitchen. We can reach the stables from there. Daniel shook his head. They'll have men watching the rear of the house. Our best chance is to face them directly. That's madness, Catherine protested. There are at least 4 of them. 5, Daniel corrected, peering through the window again. And they don't know I'm here. That gives us an advantage. A heavy knock sounded at the front door, followed by a cultured voice calling, "Miss Morgan? Edward Chamberlain here. I'd like a word about your brother's property." Catherine's eyes met Daniel's. "What do you propose?" "I'll remain hidden. Answer the door, but keep him on the porch. Don't let them inside if possible. Find out what they know about Thomas." Catherine nodded, smoothing her riding skirt with hands that trembled slightly. "And if they force their way in?" Daniel checked his revolver. "Then we move to less diplomatic solutions." Catherine walked to the front door, pausing to draw a steadying breath before opening it just wide enough to reveal her face. "Mr. Chamberlain," she acknowledged coolly. "This is an unexpected visit." The man before her tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. His expensive suit and manicured appearance seemed out of place in the rugged surroundings. Behind him, 4 hard-faced men remained mounted, their postures alert. "My apologies for arriving unannounced, Miss Morgan. I was hoping to speak with your brother regarding a business proposition. I'm afraid Thomas is away on business. I'm handling ranch affairs in his absence." Chamberlain's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened slightly. "How unfortunate. When do you expect his return?" "That's difficult to say. Ranch business can be unpredictable. Perhaps you could leave your card and he can contact you upon his return." "I'm afraid my offer is time-sensitive," Chamberlain said, his tone losing some of its polish. "Chamberlain Development is prepared to pay generously for Twin Pines, well above market value. Your brother expressed interest when we last spoke." Catherine's surprise must have shown on her face because Chamberlain's smile widened slightly. "He didn't mention our discussions. We met in Helena 3 weeks ago. I assume that's where he's gone now, to consider my proposal." Thomas had indeed traveled to Helena, but he'd never mentioned meeting with any developers. Another lie, then. "Mr. Chamberlain, I'm not authorized to sell this property. You'll need to return when my brother—" "Miss Morgan," Chamberlain interrupted, his voice hardening, "I think it would be best if we discuss this matter inside. The Montana sun is unforgiving this time of year." As he spoke, 2 of his men dismounted and moved to flank him on the porch. Catherine held her ground, though every instinct urged her to retreat. "As I said, my brother isn't here. I won't invite strangers into our home during his absence." Chamberlain's pretense of civility evaporated. "I don't think you understand the situation, Miss Morgan. Your brother won't be returning. He encountered some difficulties in Helena. Now, we can conclude our business amicably or—" The sharp click of a revolver being cocked interrupted him. Daniel stepped into view behind Catherine, his weapon trained steadily on Chamberlain's chest. "Or you can leave while you still have the option," Daniel finished for him. Chamberlain's eyes widened momentarily before narrowing in calculation. "Wolfe. I wondered if Morgan would send for you." "You remember me. I'm flattered. Hard to forget the man who cost me a fortune in Missouri." Chamberlain's gaze slid to his mounted men. "But you appear to be outnumbered." "Quality over quantity," Daniel replied. "Your hired guns are used to intimidating farmers and ranchers, not facing men who shoot back." The standoff stretched taut as wire. Catherine remained still, her derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt, ready if needed. Chamberlain broke the silence with a laugh devoid of humor. "Always the hero, Wolfe. But this isn't Missouri. I own half the judges in the territory now. Morgan's evidence won't matter." "Perhaps not to the judges," Daniel conceded, "but I imagine the territorial governor would find it interesting. Or the newspapers in Helena." Catherine seized the opening. "You mentioned my brother encountered difficulties in Helena. What have you done to him?" A smile spread across Chamberlain's face. "Nothing permanent yet. Morgan is being held by associates of mine. His continued good health depends entirely on our business concluding satisfactorily." "Then you've made a grave miscalculation," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. Thomas would never agree to any arrangement made under duress, and neither will I. Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself partially in front of Catherine. Here's what's going to happen, Chamberlain. You're going to tell us where Thomas Morgan is being held. Then you're going to leave this territory and never return. Chamberlain sneered. You're in no position to make demands, Wolfe. On the contrary, came a new voice from behind Chamberlain's men. All eyes turned to see a group of riders entering the ranch yard, the missing ranch hands, accompanied by the local sheriff and several deputies. Sheriff Mills, Catherine called out, relief evident in her voice. Your timing is impeccable. The sheriff, a grizzled veteran of frontier law enforcement, dismounted slowly. Got a wire from your brother this morning, Miss Morgan. Asked me to check on you, said you might have unwelcome visitors. His hand rested meaningfully on his holstered pistol. Mr. Chamberlain, I believe you and your men are trespassing. Chamberlain's confident demeanor faltered slightly as he found himself surrounded. We were just concluding our business, Sheriff. No laws broken here. That right, Miss Morgan? The sheriff asked, his weathered face impassive. Catherine stepped forward. Mr. Chamberlain was just threatening my brother's life, unless I signed over our ranch. I believe extortion is still illegal in Montana territory. That it is, the sheriff agreed mildly. Along with kidnapping, which is what you implied about Thomas Morgan's whereabouts. He turned to his deputies. Disarm these men and take them into custody. As Chamberlain and his men were being arrested, Catherine turned to Daniel. If Thomas was able to send a wire to the sheriff, he must be free. Daniel nodded. Or he managed to get a message out before they took him. Either way, we need to find him. The following days passed in a blur of activity. Daniel rode to Helena with Sheriff Mills and 2 deputies, carrying the evidence Thomas had collected. They returned 5 days later with Thomas Morgan himself, thinner and sporting a healing cut above one eye, but otherwise unharmed. The reunion between brother and sister took place on the porch of Twin Pines, with Daniel watching from a respectful distance. There would be time later for explanations and plans for the future. For now, it was enough to see the relief and joy on Catherine's face as she embraced her brother. That evening, after Thomas had been properly fed and reunited with his daughter, the 3 adults gathered in the study. Clara had been put to bed with promises that her father wouldn't disappear again. I owe you both my life, Thomas said, settling into his chair with a glass of whiskey. Chamberlain's men were planning to stage an accident once the property transfer was complete. How did you escape? Catherine asked. Thomas smiled tiredly. I didn't. The territorial marshal raided their operation the day before you arrived in Helena. Pure luck, they were investigating another matter entirely. And the wire to Sheriff Mills? Daniel asked. Sent as soon as I was released. I knew Chamberlain would make his move on the ranch once word reached him that I was free. Thomas raised his glass in a toast, to fortuitous timing. They drank in companionable silence, the tension of the past days finally beginning to ease. What happens now? Catherine eventually asked. Will Chamberlain face justice? The evidence is substantial, Thomas replied. Wire fraud, extortion, kidnapping, enough to send him away for years, assuming the case isn't mysteriously dismissed. It won't be, Daniel assured them. I've sent copies of your evidence to certain newspapers and territorial officials. Too many eyes are watching now. Thomas nodded gratefully. And what about you, old friend? What awaits Daniel Wolfe once this matter concludes? Daniel's gaze strayed to Catherine, who had been watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. I haven't decided, he admitted. For the first time in years, my future seems open to possibilities. Later, as Daniel stood on the porch contemplating the stars scattered across the Montana sky, he heard the door open behind him. Catherine joined him at the railing, her presence bringing a comfort he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Thomas tells me you've been offered a position as deputy marshal, she said. Daniel nodded. Based in Helena, your brother's recommendation carries weight with the territorial authorities. Helena is only 2 days' ride from here, Catherine observed, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Close enough for regular visits. Is that an invitation, Miss Morgan? She turned to face him, the moonlight illuminating the smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Consider it a standing one, Mr. Wolfe. For a man who rides to the rescue of virtual strangers based on nothing more than a letter and his own sense of honor. You weren't a stranger, Daniel said quietly. Thomas spoke of you often during our time together. I felt I knew you before we met. And now that we have met, Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Now I find myself reluctant to say goodbye. Then don't, she replied simply. At least, not yet. As their lips met beneath the vast Montana sky, Daniel Wolfe, former soldier, gunslinger, and now perhaps marshal, knew that whatever path his future took, it would somehow lead back to Twin Pines Ranch and the remarkable woman who had claimed a place in his heart with her courage and grace. The past had finally been laid to rest, and the promise of tomorrow stretched before them like the endless prairie at dawn, full of possibility and hope.